clinicians, vaping is hopefully a little bit top of mind, although it's very shocking to me. Well, I talk to hygienists all the time. How few hygienists are talking about vaping in their practice, or even simply asking their patients if they vape. FDA is finally stepping in and treating it more like tobacco cigarettes. Marketing, when you think about tobacco versus vaping, you can't put a sexy person smoking a cigarette on TV, but you sure as heck can do that with vaping. When you think about tobacco, we made such progress in really minimizing how much tobacco use in youth, to the point where I think a lot of youth, you would say 5 years ago, would say, oh, smoking's disgusting. New research, by the way, kind of interesting and scary research, is what they're finding is that they believe that vaping is now kind of the gateway to traditional tobacco again. So it's now going back in the other direction.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 388. My name is Andrew. I'm your host, and thank you so much for being with us today. And it's going to be another great one, too, as we bring back Catrice Opichka and talk a little bit about some of the newest information as it regards to vaping. I know vaping is always talked about. I love the way that Catrice brings the information. It's unique. It's different. The cadence is different. The information is different. I loved it. Now, there is a lot to cover on this topic, and I do really appreciate her trying to condense her 3-hour course into about 30 minutes just for us, but it doesn't really begin to cover it. So I really can't implore you enough. Please go find her speak somewhere on this topic. She does a great job. It's very researched. It's very evidence-based. You'll love it. Also, she will be speaking at the Collaboration Cures meeting in September. I believe it's in Orlando. I have a link for that in the show notes if you're interested. I think it'd be a really good opportunity to go watch her and several other really amazing speakers at that event. And next week, we will have a special episode with Dr. David Rice and Dr. Pam Ragliano Munoz. They have a new podcast coming out starting in July called Dentistry Unmasked. The trailer for it is out now, so if you wanted to give it a listen, you're more than welcome to. You just need to search in your podcast app, the same app that you're listening to this episode on, and you will find it. We talk about some of the guests that they're going to have on. I was very fortunate to be behind the scenes on some of the recordings, and they have some of the most amazing guests that are really smart, really just involved. I was so happy to be able to hear these things firsthand, and I know that you're going to love them too. And I think what's more important is this is a podcast that maybe both you and your doctors could really appreciate together. So I'm really looking forward to that episode coming out for y'all next week. Short and sweet today for the intro. Our editing team is going to love me for that. Special thanks to Catrice for always doing such a great job and being such an advocate for our profession. And please enjoy this episode with Catrice Opichka.
A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome everyone into the interview portion of the podcast. Really excited today. Catrice is back. Catrice, here's the thing. I really wish I would have hit record a while ago. We talked a little bit about like your last episode. You were on, I think we recorded Under One Roof last year, right? And then you were on, and it was on HPV, I believe.
Yes.
And your delivery style is very different. And I got plenty of compliments about how you are as a human being. And so I'm really excited for you to talk today and just be you. Because I feel like sometimes we get like a facade or a pretense or whatever. Like, I love your style.
Well, thank you. And you know what, maybe I'll just repeat what we kind of chatted about earlier is I'm a CE junkie just like everyone else, right? I mean, everybody who's listening, we're listening for a reason. And we love the education. We love the knowledge. And I'm you. I like sit in the audience and I love it as well. But as I sit in the audience, I see presentations through the eyes of a learner and a fellow speaker. And some of these individuals who are speaking are amazing. I mean, they're just so well put together and like head to toe, they're just gorgeous and they speak well, and they're very well put together. You can tell they spent a lot of time on their craft. So as we talked about, I look at myself much more as at the core, I'm a hygienist who happens to love sharing the information. I'm not as polished as many, but I love that people want to hear more about these topics like HPV, like vaping, sometimes the harder topics to talk with patients about. So, so thank you
Mhm.
for having me back as a regular hygienist chick.
Well, from what I understand, we're probably going to even do maybe one more at a later date here.
Fun.
Look, I would love to have you just come be my co-host every week, and we can just have all the funs in the
There
world.
you go.
But you don't ever have time. You are so busy. What are you up to lately?
Oh, well, the same stuff. I do still present quite a bit, since the COVID thing, I don't want to say is over, but is kind of rolling out of our world. I've been doing a lot more presenting again. That was kind of
Mm.
halted during COVID. So I'm really, I love being back. I love being live with other hygienists to talk and collaborate and really work together to make our profession better. I'm still doing a lot of examinations. As you know, I work with credits, the Central Regional Dental Testing Services, and I absolutely love my role there. I love being kind of a part of the next generation of dental hygienists. It's very fun for me.
We have vaping as our topic, everyone. We're going to get there in just one quick second, but I just want your opinion as an examiner.
Yes.
If you had like one thing that you could tell all the students, and everyone's already taken their boards for this year, so this might be for next year's students, one piece of advice to help them pass their clinical exams.
Yes. Well, and it's simple stuff. It's not rocket science. So as an examiner, the things that I see, both on hygiene side, but definitely for those hygienists who are taking the restorative exam, the things that I see, the stumbling blocks, 100% are avoidable and are caused by nerves. I really, and like I said, it's not rocket science. I would love to tell you that there's some great formula, like step one, like a recipe for success when it comes to board exams. But bottom line is, I find that the candidates that wait to the very last minute and are working on their restoration to the very last minute, or their patient, and that don't take a moment to kind of take a breath, re-explore, or recheck the restoration, that's when I see people run into issues. And when they go into the retake, they rock it, and they rock it because they got the nerves out. So I think my biggest recommendation is simple: take a breath, to stand back, take a look at your last restoration. Is it what you want it to be? Have you removed the wedge from the tissue? Like big things, or re-explore. Just shake off those nerves and then go into it with confidence. Again, not rocket science, but when I see people not successful with their restorations or their hygiene, it is 100% because of stress.
What's interesting, you mentioned that, and then I was thinking in clinic we did that too. I don't know if you probably did this, maybe didn't, but especially particularly challenging restorations that I was placing, or maybe it was like a deep pocket that I'm like, did I get it? I think I did, but I'm not really sure. I would literally just get up, walk away for a minute, blink my eyes a bunch of times, and now you have a fresh view. Right. And you're like, okay, let me go now in there, compare that with what my ideal image is of this situation, and is it there or is it not there? What kind of piggyback on your thing is, I'm a tinkerer, and I would be that person that was like using up all of my time and just like trying to clean things up, but then I end up messing it up even worse.
Right.
So anyway.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is it's not the little things that'll get you. It's not, the perfect marginal ridge not being perfect. That's not going to get you. It's going to be overthinking, over carving, that's the stuff that actually will kind of get you in the end. And those are the things that I think candidates struggle with. So I agree totally. And I love the idea of taking a minute or even 30 seconds to walk around. I think candidates going, oh my God, my time is so precious and I have to use every second. And you have plenty of time, really.
Yeah.
You just kind of got to step. I love the walk around and kind of clear your head thing, because I think you come back with fresh eyes, fresh fingers, and ready to go. Okay, this is it. I'm ready for this. So yeah.
Let's do another episode in a later date, and we'll have credits people on, like a round table of all of our favorite credits people. And we'll do that.
That would be really great. I would love that.
It'd be like an 8-hour long episode. We're all talkers.
I know, right?
So So the unfortunate part is, we have about 30 minutes or so to cover this topic that I know your presentation on it is 3 hours long.
It's about 3 hours.
So let's just try and hit kind of some high level or even some parts of this discussion that are just calling you that you feel like need to get out there. Like, where should we start with vaping?
Right. And where I usually start is the history of vaping, but given the time limit, I think let's fast forward through that. That's fun stuff. I really love seeing kind of where we've come, especially when we're talking about the rules and regulations in the FDA, how to get where we are today. But we're going to kind of fast forward through that today and go to what is happening today. Because I think, as clinicians, vaping is hopefully a little bit top of mind, although it's very shocking to me at how few people, I talk to hygienists all the time, how few hygienists are talking about vaping in their practice, or even simply asking their patients if they vape. So the first thing, kind of like if I'm starting in with 1, 2, 3, what's the most important thing is, one, we have to start making this part of our practice. I remember 30 years ago when I was a new hygienist coming out, we talked about smoking and chewing tobacco all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see vaping as being the same focus. And I understand that we're busy. There's a lot to talk about, but I think number one is really adding it to our health history and actually talking about vaping. A lot of us have health histories that say, do you smoke? That's all they say. If you ask anybody who vapes, if you smoke, they're going to say, no, I don't smoke. So really making that part of the core values of our office is really bringing this awareness to the forefront is number one.
Let me ask you this, Catrice, because, I have this revisionist history. Like I've only been, in the profession for 12+ years. When we got in, we also were told, okay, we need to make sure that, tobacco is a big deal. Chewing tobacco specifically in Washington, but probably everywhere, was like a big deal, right? But I feel like I was always a little bit more cautious because I was getting those patients that said, you are always so mean to me, hygienist. You're always telling me I need to quit tobacco. Like, do you feel like this newer generation of hygienists is maybe a little bit scared to probe deeper into these types of questions and the follow-up questions because of that history of people getting really pissy at us for talking about it?
Yeah. And I think here's the thing. I think I agree with you. I think hygienists today are a little bit nervous about talking about tobacco, but I think a lot of it is because we're not just talking about tobacco anymore. I always tell the story about my first experience with my patient who was the 3-pack-a-day smoker. And I was like, ooh, we're going to create the smoking cessation plan. And I couldn't wait to tell him. And he seriously shook his finger in my face and was like, listen, honey, I've been smoking longer than you've been alive. Right. And I was like, what? This is not how conversation supposed to go. And I remember, feeling kind of uncomfortable, like, oh, shoot, I didn't realize how this was going to be taken by everybody. Well, fast forward 30 years, I literally had a conversation within the last couple months with a young lady who was cutting. As I was taking her blood pressure, I realized that she had clearly been cutting for a long time. These are conversations that we're having in our practice now about vaping and HPV and cutting and mental health. Like all this comes into play. So now all of a sudden smoking and chewing tobacco, which was hard enough, is now just one of 10 really difficult conversations we have to have in practice in the same, if we're lucky, 60 minutes. So I think some of it might be discomfort, but some of it might be just the reality of we have a very limited time to really focus on the most important conversation pieces for that patient. And sometimes smoking doesn't come up. Sometimes vaping doesn't come up. What I'm suggesting is that, one, we have to start practicing, kind of to your point of the discomfort level. We need to start practicing those conversations to make sure that we feel comfortable having them. And then not only practicing them, but practicing the rebuttal. When patients are like, say to you, I don't want to talk about this, and you can't make me talk about this. Being able to have a plan B of sliding the information in and making sure that it's okay that we don't talk about it, but I'm still going to educate you carefully and throw out some of those statistics and understanding and give people places to research on their own if they so feel like doing. So I'm definitely not here to tell you that these conversations are getting any easier from when you and I were in school.
Is it on the health history, we had before, okay, if you hit yes, and this is on electronic health histories, you hit yes, then it would say, okay, well, how many, how often? They have all these little cascading questions. What kind of questions are associated with vaping? Because it's not any longer a by the stick kind of a situation.
No, and it's actually harder. It's harder to have a baseline. When a patient was smoking, it was really easy to go, oh, last time we talked, you're smoking about a pack a day. Oh, I'm down to a half a pack a day. It's very easy to monetize those things, where vaping is a little bit different. How much do you vape? Is it by minutes or hours or cartridges? So it's not the same value. So I think that a lot of those this is what I would have if I'm building a health history and I have the ability to go, here's the subcategories under, do you vape? I wouldn't focus as much on how much are you vaping? Like, it's a liquid measurement. It's a little bit harder, a lot harder. I would focus on, are you vaping to quit smoking? Are you using it as smoking cessation, or are you doing it recreationally? The education that comes after those two answers are going to be totally different, right? That would be one of the questions. The other question I would ask is, how much nicotine is in your vaping solution? Because remember, tobacco is about 12 milligrams across the board. It's the same. With vaping, it's not. With vaping, you can have 0 milligrams, 12, 36, and a lot of the Juul type devices, we're talking huge, like over 36 milligrams of nicotine. It's a huge amount. So that as a health professional, I would want to know how much nicotine. And then the final question, which sometimes people can't answer, but it's super important, is this traditional nicotine, or free-base nicotine, or are we dealing with nic salts? Because that completely changes it. Now nobody can see your face, but Andrew's got this like,
I'm like, what's a nic salt?
You're getting squinchy eye. Like, what is a nic salt? So his face is asking the question. And so the answer is, nic salts actually are what Juul uses with their nicotine. And what they do is they add acid to traditional free-base nicotine to increase its potency, to increase the ability of that nicotine to cross the blood-brain barrier. So what it does is it helps that nicotine to work faster and stronger. And so as, again, a health professional, I want to know, what kind of nicotine are we talking about? Are we talking about the original bad guy or the new and improved on steroids bad guy? And then then again, all of those three things kind of build my, okay, now what am I going to talk about? How am I going to address that? And then part of that addressing it is understanding, again, it would take 3 hours for us to get all of the great research, but to understand, okay, so I now know this. How do I handle that in practice? How do I build that education in to my dental practice? And again, we're still scaling. To me, scaling is like education central. It shuts them up and it allows me to now, to me, being a hygienist, this is how it looks for me. The beginning of the appointment, I'm the detective. I'm figuring out what they're doing, I'm assessing their oral condition. And then I take all of that knowledge that I receive in what feels like split seconds. And now I'm deciding how I'm going to handle the education for the rest of the appointment. How am I going to prioritize that? Because some people walk in and you're like, dang, what am I going to talk about today? Yeah. So then just building that education in, and that's part of we need to keep learning about vaping because it's forever changing. There's a lot of new things happening there now that the FDA, and I'm not giving you a chance to ask any more questions, right? I'm rolling into all the fun stuff.
That's fine. I'll put a pin because I do have a question about the nic salts later. Okay.
Well, you know what? You ask a question and I'll talk about the FDA next.
Okay. That sounds good. This is why you need to be my co-host. This is great. Okay. So it's just a point of clarification. So the nic salts, as it makes it, I guess, a quicker uptake, you feel it's a stronger uptake, you feel better. Is that more for are there any oral manifestations different between the two nicotines, or is one truly just for habit forming? And
Great question. Actually, so we know it's habit forming. So we know that nic salts increases your risk of becoming addicted to nicotine.
Mhm.
Not that nicotine needed any help with that, but it just kind of increased that. I have not read any research on or seen anything really as far as the difference between what are we looking at orally, right? But I'll tell you, with my vaping patients, I'll see very similar oral manifestations with nicotine from vaping as I do with nicotine and tobacco. You still, and actually sometimes even worse, because because you're inhaling that vapor, the temperature is completely different than what you're inhaling with tobacco. So a lot of times we're seeing like intraoral burns that potentially can happen because when you're vaping, the temperature fluctuation is great.
Mhm.
And so, sometimes when you inhale, it's a certain heat versus you can inhale an hour later and it'll be completely different, right? So
Mhm.
so we're seeing a lot of fluctuation as far as heat and the intraoral burning. But to answer your question, I don't have science backing that, but I'm gonna guess that we probably are seeing that. It's just we haven't researched it yet.
Sure. I mean, it's so new, right? And
Right.
I would assume, like, with that stronger habit, then it's more use, more consumption, and then you see the other oral manifestations because of that, but maybe not directly with the nicotine itself.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, it's easy to use too, right? So it's not like
Yeah.
you light up a cigarette and you're like, okay, well, I only have a few seconds, so I'm not going to waste a cigarette because they're expensive. With vaping, it's
Mhm.
like I have a few seconds, I'm going to take a puff or two. So the use is greater because it's to the ease of use is so different than tobacco.
I've never had an Uber driver not vape in when I've been in Chicago. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, and then we need to talk about secondhand and third-hand vape, um, complications because that is new research as well. So, let's go back to just FDA changes because I think this is the stuff that I've been waiting for, researching this for so long, is FDA is finally stepping in and saying, "Okay, we need to do something about this." Actually, in 2017, they started talking about wanting to have some control and regulations and treating it more like tobacco cigarettes. They get a marketing when you think about tobacco versus vaping. You can't put a sexy person smoking a cigarette on TV, but you sure as heck can do that with vaping. And so, really taking some of the things that they've done with tobacco and rolling it into vaping. So, finally, after how many years of working on this, we're starting to see regulations. A lot of states are banning flavored cartridges, or especially cartridges that appeal to children. I mean, there's literally vaping cartridges that look like candy and soda pop. Depends on where you're from. Soda pop, soda pop, um,
Soda,
soda pop,
a
uh,
beverage,
a beverage, fizzy,
a
um,
fizzy drink.
fizzy drink. So, so they're starting to try to protect children and teens in that way. The big change is now the FDA is requiring companies to actually send in their product list, so basically ingredient list, and work with the FDA to become approved as an approved vaping device. Now, the disappointing thing for me is instead of going vaping bad, let's tell you why. Now they're going through this like approval process, and there's actually some vaping solutions that have been approved by the FDA. So
Hold on? Do they get to say like approved by FDA on their label now?
yeah,
Then.
yes, and so and
Hmm.
now the FDA is starting to find companies that are selling products that aren't approved. So, and of course, of the over a million products that have been registered, I mean, they've only approved several. But the good thing that comes out of this, I don't understand the rationale, but the good thing that comes of this is for the first time in the history of vaping, some organization is actually looking at what is in this stuff. So we're getting a better idea because they're all so different. So we're finally getting a good idea of like real data. What are they putting in this stuff and what do we need to be concerned about? Because nicotine's not the only thing in this solution that we have to worry about. There are there's heavy metals that we need to be concerned about inhaling into our lungs. There's diacetyl type products, which is basically a flavoring product that makes a kind of a buttery flavor. It's in a lot of your coconuts and vanillas. That has been linked to popcorn lung historically in popcorn factories. So it is a human carcinogen. We know this, but they're still putting that into our vape. I talk like I've never vaped, just so you know. I've never inhaled.
Put that disclaimer out there. Never inhaled.
Never inhaled. And then simply when we're talking about just the problems with health, right? The chemical things that happen, it's not just what is in this stuff, it's the chemical reaction of the vaping process itself. And this is one thing that people say, okay, good for you, FDA. You're finally taking a stance. The problem is all they're looking at is what is in it, not the chemical reaction that happens. In other words, everything that they put in vape has to sit in a solution. It's basically where it's a suspension liquid, and that suspension liquid holds everything else. And that suspension liquid is propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, things like that. On its own, it's no big deal. It doesn't harm you. It's in a lot of makeup and lotions and cosmetic stuff. But when it's heated to combustion and inhaled into the lungs, it actually turns into formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, which we know as a human carcinogen. So, digging deeper, there's a lot to. When patients ask me, I'm stopping myself in mid-thought because I need 3 hours to tell you this stuff. When patients ask me, okay, I vape and I smoke, I'll quit one. Which one do you want me? People actually ask me that. And early on, I probably, like, if they held a gun to my head, I probably would have said quit tobacco, because it's what we've been taught, right? Quit tobacco, quit tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Today, knowing what I know about vaping, if they make me answer, and I don't like it, I don't want them to use either, but if they make me answer, I'm almost more comfortable with tobacco than I am with vaping, just with what we know today.
Interesting.
Nothing compared to what we're going to know once they start getting more of these, chemical profiles of the vape solutions.
Is it not the FDA's responsibility to look at those interactions between the chemicals? Who's responsible for monitoring that?
I'm going to guess it's the FDA. Right now, it's the FDA. And I think that, that eventually that's probably going to be on their mind. I mean, there are people, they're much smarter than me, right? So I'm sure that they understand.
Apparently they don't work at the FDA, though.
Yeah, well, perhaps. But this is what I think happens, right? It's baby steps. And it's like anytime you get in, for any hygienist who's decided to jump in the political arena, and you're like, I'm going to make changes and it's going to be great. And then you get in there and then you put on the brakes because you realize it's not as simple as changing wording or making a decision and it's going to happen. It is a process. And so it's easy to look at the FDA going, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this? But anybody who's been in any political arena like this, there's laws and rules and testing and protocol, and it takes a long time to get from, I think that we need to make a change, to actually making a change. It takes sometimes decades. In other words, that right now they're looking at the products. Next, they'll probably look at chemical reactions that happen within the vaping device itself. And then next, they'll finally start talking about secondhand vape, right? What does that really do? And isn't that a wonderful segue into secondhand vape?
It was so good.
I know, right? It's almost like I know what I'm doing. So when I talk to hygienists, when I speak to hygienists, one of the questions that always comes up is, well, what about secondhand vape? Is there a thing? And there is. And what they're finding in the new research is actually there's more secondhand vape than there is secondhand smoke. And because of how viscous the solutions are and the droplets that happen in the air and kind of fall, not only do you stand the risk of having secondhand vape, which is basically inhaling the exhaled vapor from somebody who's using the product, but third hand vape, where because of how sticky the stuff is and how much it lingers, You can literally, let's say you have an infant and Uncle Joe comes in with his vaping device, vapes all over your house, and you have an infant touch a surface and then put their hands in their mouth, it literally can transfer. So third hand vaping is basically you can actually touch a surface and have that all those chemicals enter your skin and enter a mouth potentially. So again, to be continued in another how many, handful of years, it's
Mhm.
probably going to be the FDA focus is talking about second and third hand vaping.
Is
Right
the
now,
preliminary findings on that though that it is more dangerous than, and this is, look, Andrew the dum dum here. I think about like secondhand smoke. I think about being in, great grandma's house or grandma's car or whatever, and like it is just a plume, and I can't help but ingest it. But as you mentioned, it's a heavier particle size. So even if someone is vaping and then exhaling, you would assume that a lot of those particles would drop to the ground
correct.
before it got to you.
Yeah, they've actually done testing of like couches and curtains and things in the home, and they're finding that as opposed to traditional tobacco, you are finding more residue from somebody who has vaped in that environment. And you bring up a really good point too, as a non-smoker. This is kind of what, and again, this is not research, this is just my thoughts, and my thoughts all along is why I always felt like secondhand vape was going to be a bigger issue. So as a non-smoker, if you're in someone's home who smokes, your tendency is going to be to get the heck out of there, right? You're going to spend as little time in there as possible. If you're in an environment where somebody is smoking next to you, as a non-smoker, you don't hang around.
Mhm.
You usually leave, or you do something to avoid that smell, because non-smokers don't like the smell of tobacco. So you're getting as little as possible, right? You're making efforts to not get that secondhand particle. Vaping, if you've ever been around anybody who vapes, it's delicious. Like, it smells fantastic. It smells like watermelon and raspberry and all of these great. So you make less of an effort to get yourself out of that environment, to walk away, to leave the home. And, you have a tendency to go, ooh, that smells good. And what's the first thing you do? You like inhale really deep so you can get the whiff of it. I literally followed a guy. I didn't realize this is what I was doing. I was down in this cute little town called Fairhaven by my house, and I'm like, ooh, I smell raspberry. There's got to be a bakery around here, and I'm sniffing like crazy, and I'm sniffing and sniffing, and I go around the corner, and I'm following a dude who's vaping. And I thought it was a bakery. So we have this natural tendency to like actually inhale those great smells. Again, what does that do to our secondhand vape
Mhm.
statistics? And what, again, we don't know. It's research is relatively new, but eventually we're going to be having some really good scientifically backed up conversations about what this means for us, as
I know.
non-smokers alike.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know there's a bunch of, I don't want to call them weirdos because I'm sure that some of them are listening to the podcast now, but people who are like, you know what? I don't mind the smell of tobacco smoke.
Yeah.
There are some people who are like, you know what? I don't mind the smell of like marijuana, but by the way, that just smells like skunk weed. I just does not, I can never like appreciate it. But then there was always the pipe smoke, right? That was the one that was always like, oh, it's a little bit tantalizing. Not the cigar smoke. That was disgusting, but the pipe smoke was always the one that
Agree.
people were like, I can get there. And now you're right. We have all of these cotton candies and,
Right.
berry flavor, like all of these things that smell so good.
Right. And, we talk about, the FDA is working really hard to ban these in certain states. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think California was like one of the first states to go, okay, we're not going to sell any of this flavored stuff. So we're going to, and which is a great effort. But
Mhm.
I'm willing to bet that there are young people in California that are smoking it or they're vaping it, right?
Yeah.
So just because it's banned in a couple of places doesn't mean that people aren't getting their hands on it. And again, there's just, I think about all of the wonderful things they're trying to do to minimize youth getting their hands on it. But you look at Juul, it's relatively inexpensive. It's super small. It looks like a little, for those of you who haven't seen one, it looks like a little, basically a thumb drive. It's very, very small. And they have found it in grade schools, primary schools. They have actually found kids on the playground vaping because it is relatively inexpensive, and they're getting their hands on, typically it's Juul products, which did a really great job of trying to market themselves as being like not like everybody else because we're
Hmm.
safer. And again, what we're finding is because of the levels of nicotine and because it's nic salts, not traditional free-base nicotine, these products that kids can get their hands on easier are actually probably the worst for them. So, I think we have a long road ahead of us in trying to, when you think about tobacco, we made such progress
Hmm.
and really minimizing how much tobacco use in youth to the point where I think a lot of youth, you would say 5 years ago, would say, oh, smoking is disgusting.
Hmm.
New research, by the way, kind of interesting and scary research, is what they're finding is that they believe that vaping is now kind of the gateway to traditional tobacco again. So it's now going back in the other direction, that they feel like people start vaping and they're now young people and now they're rolling into tobacco. And so that's a big concern too, is, the last 20 years, we've made such great strides in reducing the numbers of people using traditional tobacco. And now the concern is not just vaping product itself, but is it going to be a gateway to young people grabbing onto that cigarette again? So
You mentioned, if you want to make change and get into the politics and you can't just make them right away. Well, usually what we see though is there's usually partnerships and allies of, other groups that are affiliated or associated or have like the same cause, and they band together and then they're able to make change. So does the FDA not have any partners that can help them ban things and fight this fight?
good question. I don't know the answer to that. Perhaps, and they probably do, and they're probably working on it. Like I said, there are people that are smarter than me. I don't know if, who those people would be, but it only makes sense that they would, because on the other side, you've got vaping companies, and who do you think are aligning with them right now?
Big tobacco, right?
Big tobacco, because
Yeah.
for years, big tobacco is now all of a sudden going, oh, we're not the big guy anymore. We're not as successful as we used to be, and so now big tobacco is actually, kind of jumping into bed with vaping companies because they're
Hmm.
getting on the bandwagon, and so hopefully you're right. Hopefully the FDA is really working with other organizations, because on the flip side, vaping certainly is.
Yeah.
So it again, it's the uphill battle that we're going to be talking about this for a really long time. But I am happy to see the changes, the attempts, the slow progress toward at least protecting our youth. I always say as a hygienist, we're not gonna get everybody to make healthy choices.
Hmm.
My focus, number one, is to make informed choices. So if people are going to make bad decisions for their oral health or for products that they're using, if they're going to make bad decisions, that's up to them. I just want them to make an informed bad decision. So you know what I mean? Which is it
That
sounds,
sounded really bad the way you said it, but it makes sense. But
you
yeah,
know what I mean? It's like I
please
want.
make informed bad decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're going to make great decisions, I can give you reasons why you should. But if you
Mhm.
choose not to, at least I know that you are walking away going, okay, this could cause cancer. This could cause periodontal disease. This could cause blah, 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 fill in the blank. But I'm still making that choice.
Yeah.
And so at least we've done our job to educate. We can't go home with them, and nor would we want to, and follow them around and make sure they're making great choices. But at least what we can do is ensure that they have all of the information to make that bad decision if they want.
Catrice, I love when you're on. I can't wait for you to come back. This is a 3-hour course, everyone. So if someone wanted to take your course, where are you speaking, or where can they find your speaking schedule?
Well, the fun thing is I'm going to start doing a little more web sessions, giving some more information about vaping and all of the other topics I talk about, like HPV. Again, you mentioned earlier, I have a new program on burnout, which I really, really love. I think it's I cry like 14 times during that session because it really resonates with experiences that I've had. So I think the greatest way to get more information on future programs is to simply email me. I'll give you my email. I know you'll probably put it in a link as well, but it's simply Catrice at pureeducation.org. If you email me as well, Andrew, you and I have talked about this. I am a firm believer in sharing the knowledge, and I have absolutely no problem sharing all of my research. And I have recently collected all of the research that I have done to build my entire 3-hour vaping course. And it's located in a link. It's basically my digital toolbox. And so for those listeners who are like, oh my God, I really want to learn more. I don't know when I'm going to get to see Catrice speak live, but I want to dig in more. I'm happy to share that. So if somebody emails me, just let me, just in the email, just say, hey, I heard you on your podcast, and I want your toolbox. And I will send you the link to every piece of research that I currently have on vaping, because I think that the more we
You're too
have,
generous.
the more we have in our back pocket to educate patients, the better job we can do keeping adults and kids alike healthy and safe.
Wow. That's very, very, very generous of you. I can't believe you're doing that. There are speakers out there that won't even give, one little link or one little tidbit away. So thank you so much for doing that.
For sure. It's all yours.
Buddy, until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.